The pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so a few announcements. Our next policy review meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, September 22nd at 1:30 p.m. Meeting location will be announced when the meeting packet is distributed. Board members, I will be considering appointments to committees and other roles in the next few days. So if you haven't sent your preferences to Ms. Coatney, I'll need you to do that so we can get our committee set up. And lastly, I just wanted the opportunity to thank Ms. Horn for her service as board chair for the last 2 years, especially this last year, because I know it's been difficult for all of us, and we really appreciate your leadership. And I know that I speak for the entire board when I say thank you, and done a wonderful job representing us. Thank you for that. So we do have a couple of changes to the agenda. You received this information via email, but I wanted to note publicly that 2 time-sensitive items were added to the meeting agenda today. One to allow Holston Middle School's band to perform and travel to Disney as item 6C21, and another item dealing with a purchase order with Pearson Ames Webb for provision of benchmark and progress monitoring tools for grades 4 through 12 as item 6C22. In addition, the second reading version of Board Policy J120 attendance has been updated based on discussion at last week's called meeting, and the backup documentation for item 10C regarding a fund balance designation has been updated to reflect the correct amount in the agenda caption. And we can have discussion on each of these new items and updates as the items are read for consideration. Are there any requested changes to the agenda?
Move to approve.
So we have a motion to approve the agenda by Ms. Horn, a second by Mr. Watson. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We do have a special recognition tonight, and I think Dr. Wilson is here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We were able to do something this past July that I don't know if we've called official recognition to, so we wanted to take a minute to do that and not wait till 2 years from now when we had our first graduating cohort, because we felt like that was a little bit long to go without recognizing it. So about 3 years ago, Dr. Ricewick and Mr. Bolton and myself went down to Nashville to meet with some folks from TDOE to talk about a grant opportunity in relation to our district becoming its own education preparation provider for our occupationally licensed teachers. As I became a new CTE director about 4.5 years ago, it became evident very quickly what a challenge it was for folks who were coming in from industry as previously working as nurses or electricians or welders or you name it, and moving into the education sector, not only to get up to speed with things like students and parents and curriculum and all of that, but then also to have to go through changing careers while then pursuing their teaching license, which usually required them to enroll with a post-secondary institution and follow a certain sequence of coursework. And a change in the law a few years back now allows LEAs to become their own EPPs, education providers. And so the state was interested in a regional opportunity here in our area that would serve our district as well as other districts in that work. And so we were able to, actually the responsibility, I guess, got bounced around for a little while, but ended up landing with CTE last year. And we were able to go through the application process. And this past July, the State Board of Education authorized Knox County Schools to serve as its own EPP. We actually started our first class, our first cohort of occupational teachers this summer who have been engaged in the work, had a kind of an intensive experience during the summer, and then a lot of what they do really is job embedded learning and practice throughout the school year. We've partnered with SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board, if you're familiar with that, as a curriculum support, and they're doing a lot of the training and kind of coaching us up on how to deliver some of that. But I wanted tonight to kind of draw attention to that. I think as a moment we can take and celebrate for that work. It does open some doors and opportunities down the line for us as a district to be able to use that EPP status in different ways if we see that as a needed recruitment and retention tool. But I also wanted to introduce and allow Ula Carr, who is the CTE specialist in my department and has done the lion's share of the legwork on this and continues to lead this work, to tell you a little bit about kind of who's involved and what we'll be doing with that program in the year to come, and then again moving forward in the future with future cohorts of teachers. So, Ms. Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. As Keith already said, my name is Ulla Carr, and I'm a CTE and EPP specialist for our Career and Technical Education Department. In that role, my work was largely centered around getting our application in front of the state last year, getting that approved, and this year to roll out the program itself. I'm proud to say we have 20 candidates already in our first cohort this year. They come largely from our own Knox County Schools district, but also from 4 surrounding districts, and from fields like cosmetology, culinary, collision repair, information technology, health sciences. So those are all teaching fields that we would love for our students to gain experiences in, and therefore we need teachers. So oftentimes we pull them out of industry and they don't have that pedagogical background and earn that through our program. We are meeting throughout the school year. We started with an intensive training week back in July. We are utilizing district learning days to meet. We are meeting virtually and in person when safety protocols allow. Our candidates also have a clinical placement as teachers of record. So it's a job embedded placement, and overall the program therefore has a theoretical coursework component and a practical component. And in the practical placement and the clinical placement, they are given an assigned mentor so that they have support right there at the school as well as administrative support through a designated principal at their school. And all of those people have been trained in the past May, right before the school year ended. Yeah, the cohort coursework is stretched over 18 months, followed by a semester of intense preparation for them to take the praxis exam and the Principles of Learning and Teaching one. And once they successfully complete that, as well as our EPP program itself, then they have fulfilled a requirement to advance their practitioner occupational license to a professional occupational license, and are one step closer to being considered a professional, successful teacher in the classroom after going through these first 3 years of intense training. So overall, we hope for this program to be supportive, of course, for our new teachers, and overall to lead to higher retention amongst those teachers who are joining us in the CTE program. Long shot down the line, we hope to expand our program to also serve other content areas outside of CTE, but right now we're getting this off the ground. Thank you.
So, Ms. Carr and Dr. Wilson, would you like to join me? We have. Right, and just a reminder to the public, we already had a detailed discussion, well, somewhat detailed, I guess, last week. I wouldn't really call that detailed at that time of night, but Typically, we would have a detailed discussion on all agenda items at the meeting prior to this one. And board members, before we consider our consent agenda, does anyone have any questions, discussions on 6C21 or 6C22? These were the new agenda items that were added.
Item 6, consent agenda.
A motion to approve by Ms. Horn, a second by Ms. Henderson. All in favor? Motion carries.
Item 7A, approve second reading of new Knox County Board of Education Policy C-250, accommodations for restrooms and changing facilities.
A motion to approve by Ms. Babb, a second by Ms. Henderson. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
7B, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy G-280, qualifications and duties of teachers as amended.
So a motion by Ms. Owen and a second by Ms. Bounds. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
7C, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy G-470, substitute teachers as amended.
So motion by Mr. Watson, second by Ms. Owen. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
7D, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy I-171, interscholastic athletics as amended.
So motion by Ms. Babb, second by Ms. Owen. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
7E, approve second reading of new Knox County Board of Education Policy J-197, student interference with the classroom.
So motion by Ms. Horn, second by Ms. Babb. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
7F, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy J-400, child abuse and neglect as amended.
So motion by Ms. Babb, second by Ms. Henderson. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
7G, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy J-120, attendance as amended.
So motion by Ms. Babb, second by Mr. McMillan. Any discussion? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a lot of discussion last week related to if this attendance policy is approved, how would we be able to delineate data related to virtual students, related to kids that are out on isolation that might be not present. And I asked Mr. Cox if he would be able to provide to the board an example of the way this data could be delineated, because I know we've had a lot of questions in the public about, does this unintentionally hide data, or, you know, are we still able to see all the things that we need to see? So I'm loving the sound. That's it. It feels like we got a big reveal coming. So I think Mr. Cox was going for effect.
Madam Chair, Mr. Watson, once the screen pulls up, I've got two charts for comparison that will kind of help you see that this gives us a little bit additional clarity into some of the current absences. So this is just example data that we pulled, and the chart kind of in the middle has the virtual learning section highlighted there in the middle. And that is currently being, counted as absent. So the chart on the right, you'll see those numbers are included in the larger section that's just labeled absenteeism. So if we have this additional code, we'll be able to kind of more finely report on those quarantine or isolated students with our attendance data. Does that make sense?
So just to be clear, if the attendance policy proceeds and we approve it, the chart on the left is a representation of the way we could see that data, where we could still see active cases in relationship to students that might be out in virtual synchronous learning because they're in a school that has a waiver at the time, versus kids that might be out in isolation, but maybe doing asynchronous work that's not at a school with a waiver, plus all of our other traditional absences.
That's correct. And this chart shows the school waiver, which is currently how Austin East and Central High School would be reported, so that we can, kind of define both school-wide waiver and then individual absences that may be related to COVID.
And so then if this doesn't pass, the chart on the right, we lose the ability to be able to delineate those students who might be out, not on a waiver, but be doing asynchronous makeup work.
That is correct.
That's correct. Thank you. I think that's really helpful to kind of see what the possibilities are of being able to represent and show that data. And I just have one more question, and Mr. Cox, this probably isn't for you, but can somebody just reiterate to us, one, what changes were made? Because I know there were some changes. This was sent out about 2:30. So what was the changes made from last week, if you can be specific about it? And then also, if we pass this, what does it add to, what's the benefit of adding this policy? I know the State Board of Education allows for us to do it. Is that you, Mr. Roswick? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Watson. So currently, well, I'm trying to think how far to go back in history. So the revisions that were made in July by the State Board, there was an existing policy prior to that defined virtual programs versus virtual schools. And so there was no option for any students to be virtual, even on a temporary basis. What the action from the State Board did in July was it opened up the opportunity for students who are on temporary, they use the word quarantine, but quarantine and isolation is what they're referencing. If local boards make an action to do that, then those students who are on quarantine or in isolation could be counted present if there are 4 criteria and you have to meet 2 of those 4. The first one would be that teachers teach synchronously, and obviously that would be difficult for us to do without adding a ton of teachers to our current group. One was what teachers would make like daily contacts, visual or phone calls to all the students that were in their class that were on that. Again, pretty big burden for teachers. The 2 that we're proposing in that would be the asynchronous model that says you could use a learning management system for students to be able to receive the work. And then the 4th one of those being that students have the opportunity either through hard copy or learning management systems to be able to submit that work. So if this passes tonight, then we would be able to count students who are isolated or quarantined present for the 10 days supposedly that they would be out if they're submitting work during that time.
Thank you. And I've just had a lot of questions about this. What's the benefit of doing that? What's the benefit of marking them present if they're technically out and doing asynchronous work?
So if you have a couple things, so one would be for students to be chronically absent. That's a thing for truancy and those sorts of things that weigh in. Also for schools, they get a score for the overall school based on chronic absenteeism by students who missed over 10% of the eligible days on their annual report. So both of those, you could knock a bunch of days out in a 10-day quarantine or isolation toward a student's 18 days that would make them chronically absent.
So we don't want to penalize a student that's being isolated toward chronic absenteeism.
Correct. Or the school they attend. Both could be on a list or dinged for that.
Right.
And I would just say one other thing too. Absent of this policy, students would not be able to be temporarily virtual. So you'd be left probably to our current makeup policy, which would be once they return from school, they have 3 days to request makeup work, and then a reasonable amount of time, I believe is what our policy reads, to make that work up. So
this allows them to do it as they're absent. While
Correct.
they're absent, they could begin that process and start doing that work. I think it's important to note, just for all of our teachers out there, I think there was some confusion about what the intent was of the conversation last week. And I think some folks took a little bit of criticism or took a little bit of, did not appreciate that way. They felt like some people were saying that the same synchronous instruction is the same thing as an asynchronous lesson being turned in. That, a student in a classroom, that type of learning is very different than a kid just doing a piece of makeup work. That we know as a district, we're not saying that that's robust instruction, but we are trying to allow for that student to not get further behind by being able to catch up while they're still out, correct?
Yeah, you're totally correct in what you're
I
saying.
didn't say that very smoothly, but you
No,
and I
you're
talked
right.
about it before, and I think you
We have.
get what I was trying to say.
Sure. So, there's probably the simplest way for me to think about it is there is no replacement for the student being in the classroom with the teacher every day. But it's better to have some asynchronous assignment that's tied to that so that the student has a better chance to at least be caught up and have some version of that when they return is better than to have nothing for 10 days. And if I could just take the opportunity too, I think, there was a lot of discussion last week and, we tried to talk through that complicated issue to explain. And I just want to make sure, just for the record too, we're not saying that this will not be a challenge for teachers to do. We understand anytime we're asking them to support Canvas and do those kinds of things, that is an addition. I do think it's a great opportunity, even post-COVID, for a student who's out for orthodontist appointment or strep throat or the flu or those kinds of things that people would have a common place to go and get makeup work. I don't think, again, if you're keeping a paper makeup work in your classroom, which has kind of been traditionally what we've done, that's not equivalent to having been in the class either,
Sure.
right? So we know
Right.
all makeup work is a little flawed, but I just want to make sure that's clear that in no way we're saying this is, this is no big deal. I should be able to click and it be done. There is some work involved and some lead time for our staff, even though they did some of that work last year at the school level. So we do understand that, but we're a bit between a rock and a hard place to try to do what's best for students at this point.
And on line 16, there is some allowance for teachers to still allow for hard copy work to be turned in the short term, that this doesn't all have to be executed tomorrow, that there is some flexibility there.
And we've actually been working on some communication. We're getting some feedback from principals right now about when a good start date might be, trying to get an idea when they feel like their staffs could be up and have the potential to do that. We sent something out to principals to begin thinking about that today and give us some input on that. Also, there may be some allowances even once we get to there, especially in elementary, kindergarten, and first grade. We've gotten a lot of feedback about that being difficult to do just with the student's ability to manipulate a computer. And obviously, we'll defer to our elementary staff and principal feedback on that as well about the best way to do it. You try to mitigate germ transfer and virus transfer. I mean, all those are factors in trying to figure out how to do that. But again, we'll try to use common sense. It won't be perfect, but we'll try to do the best we can for the students.
And there will be it sounds like there'll be some flexibility at the school level in terms of implementation.
I think there will. We were actually in some conversation with principal. We want to be sure that we don't set up a situation where it's like total flexibility. There's some level of district expectation, so it's not
There's some guardrails.
right,
Yeah.
because we don't want saying, well, my middle school student's doing this, but they're not doing this at the high school, or vice versa. So we want to make sure that we kind of have a standard way we're going about it, but obviously we always defer to principals and teachers for common sense to do what they need to at that level.
Thank you.
Ms. Horn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you've answered, Dr. Roswick, I think you've answered most of my questions. So I appreciate that you've reached out to principals to ask for a date on what is reasonable expectation to come up with something. And then just to point out for any teachers who are watching or listening, on line 16, number 4, it says students submit work via hard copy or virtual formats. So those kindergarten through second grade particularly that use Seesaw, for instance, as one virtual format, they could continue to do that because I think that there are younger grades that are already doing that. So this would allow for that. Is that correct?
Thank you, Ms. Horn. So yes, I think they're within. So I'm going to try to explain something that's complex, and I'm probably not the best guy to explain it, but I'll take a shot at it. So Canvas is our learning management system. There are a lot of different apps and different connections that can happen within kind of that platform. And my understanding is Seesaw is one of those things that can do that. So we purchased Canvas 8 or 10 years ago as kind of the top of the line for a learning management system. And the selling point on that was it is a blank canvas. You can create whatever you need to do within that. So we do have ways with Teresa Nixon and her team where they've really guided folks to be able to do some of that. So I would say if there are schools using certain things, probably just to run that through and try to get support through through Teresa Nixon and her team to see how we can best utilize that. So again, I don't know how everything talks and computes, but our goal would be not to turn everything over for families that already understand and know those things. And our answer would try to be yes. There may be a technical reason why certain things wouldn't work, and we can work through and see how we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Babb?
Yes, I guess my question is, and I mean, I think a lot of us got feedback last week from some teachers on this. As far as getting lessons up and things like that, is there any stuff that's going to be district-wide done or departmental done so that we don't have, 5,000 different teachers all having to recreate the wheel for something? But maybe there's some just unified lessons that could be used and taken and put up for this math lesson or English or things like that. I'm just curious if there's that sort of support.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. It's a good question. So we actually have a draft of a document, again, waiting on feedback from some principals. That's about a 5-page document with lots of links to lots of those types of resources that you mentioned. I think what we want to do is give a lot of options. So part of that document right now, again, in draft form, is we have some strategies that people might think through. You know, if I'm in a school where there's 7 other first grade teachers, we might have a common first grade lesson we assign, and I'm doing Mondays and you're doing Tuesdays and you're doing Wednesdays. And same thing at a higher level, multiple biology teachers, you know, they may divide and conquer because they're kind of in the same area. That's one thing they could do. Working on lessons that were created last year, those are still available to them in their Canvas site to be able to pull those down. And then also there are some things that's called a Canvas Commons that Shannon and the teaching and learning team are loading and trying to support things there. Last year, we actually had some teachers that shared to that. Some people were really good at being able to understand how to pull that down, and some we know we're going to need to support as they get to that. So our ultimate goal is to give multiple options for what people are comfortable with doing with that. But again, I want to be clear, there will still be some challenges and some, you know, folks at different skill levels, and we're not judging that. We're still in this 3-year window of trying to figure out how to do this well. So, but that's our goal, is to have multiple options. And I will say this too, you know, kudos to Teresa Nixon and Shannon and their team, Central and Austin East both, you know, quickly, because we didn't get word back from the state till midnight on Friday night, help those schools transition to virtual instruction this week. And they all kind of cleared their calendars to be on the ground there at the schools and or available through digital formats. And I think it has gone pretty well. Even with new teachers that weren't in the district last year, we got reports from them that obviously it was a little more difficult because they hadn't done it before. But their peers helping with that, as well as the support from the district office, I think has gone as well as expected.
So as a follow-up, I mean, is our intention, because it does seem like, I mean, we don't know when this sort of thing is going to happen again. And I mean, we do have kids that are out sick all the time. Is there the thought of having a maintained sort of library in Canvas that could just be used every year and just sort of updated a little bit so that we don't have to recreate this wheel all the time?
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Good question. So I think, again, to clarify some of what I said last week, that was our, if we could roll the clock back to July, right? I mean, at that point, and I know not everyone was there, it's not a political statement, but just where we were as far as case counts and that sort of thing. We had just come off a summer of summer programming, summer band camps, summer football camps, with very little spread that we had at that point. So kind of our marching orders at that part were kind of open school, still using some precautions, but somewhat pre-COVID, like if you want to think about it that way. So all of our planning going into July and conversations with principals and staff were around that. So at the Principals Institute was the first time we said exactly what you're alluding to. You know, this is a practice we want to continue moving forward. This will be at the bare minimum, Canvas should continue to be used for makeup work. And again, not even thinking about COVID resurging at this level, but just that we need to start, you know, we need to continue to flex that muscle that we grew last year and build on it. And I think that was a clear expectation. Now, fast forward to where we are now, no one thought case counts would be where they are. We understand, you know, and I really believe this in talking to some principals, that some of the thought was once we realized that the state board policy change restricted our ability to go red, as principals and staffs prioritize what's on their agenda to do, that was kind of moved way down the list, because they're going, well, we're not, you know, we're not necessarily gonna have to worry about that. So I think that's why when you talk to your principals, you probably get some mixed, you know, we're ready to go and could have gone yesterday. We haven't talked about it since July. I get why both are there. So, but I do think what you're saying is where, when all this dust settles, we want this to be a tool that every parent in Knox County knows to reach out, and that's where they can find their student's assignment, no matter why they missed that day. So that's just a natural part of what we do. But again, that takes some time to get to that level. So anything can be used again. I mean, I've taught a class in Canvas at the university level, and that's what I do every year. I load all my content back over to the next class, and I replace what I don't want and update what I need to, you know, update from there. And, you know, it takes some time to do that, but I'm not recreating it every year, to what you alluded to.
Thank you, Dr. Oswick. Is there any more discussion? Okay, so we have a motion by Ms. Babb and a second by Mr. McMillan. Is that correct? So all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 8A, approve receipt of Tennessee Department of Education School Programs Emergency Operational Cost Reimbursement Program Grant in the amount of $1,107,216.24 for reimbursement of emergency operating costs incurred during the public health emergency.
So a motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Ms. Babb. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8B, approve receipt of Tennessee Department of Education Learning Camps Transportation Grant in the amount of $1,183,213.82 for provision of transportation services related to summer learning camps.
So a motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Ms. Horn. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8C, approve receipt of Tennessee Department of Education 21st Century Community Learning Centers carryover and 2021-2022 grant award for Christenberry and Pond Gap Elementary Schools in the amount of $463,211.94.
So a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Ms. Babb. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8D, approve receipt of Tennessee Department of Education 21st Century Community Learning Centers carryover and 2021-2022 grant award for Skip Elementary School in the amount of $163,780.04.
So a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8E, approve receipt of Junior League of Knoxville Centennial Celebration Mini Grants for 31 Knox County Schools teachers in the total amount of $11,314.83.
So a motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Ms. Babb. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8F, approve receipt of grant from the Hartford in the amount of $5,000 to support the district's fire safety education efforts for kindergarten through third grade students.
A motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Ms. Horn. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8G, approve receipt of Walmart Community Grant for Hardin Valley Academy in the amount of $5,000 for creation of a learning commons in the school's library.
A motion by Ms. Henderson, a second by Ms. Horn. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8H, approve agreement and receipt of a Whole Kids Foundation Garden Grant for Pond Gap Elementary School in the amount of $3,000 for an edible educational garden project at the school.
A motion by Ms. Babb, a second by Ms. Owen. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
8I, approve receipt of grant from the Austin East Community Foundation in the amount of $40,000 for the benefit of Austin East Magnet High School.
So a motion by Ms. Satterfield, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Austin East Community Foundation. I think it's less than a year old. Is that correct, Ms. Satterfield? So I know some of the founders there and the work that went into that and to make that large of a gift at the beginning. I mean, I'm thankful for all of our funders and the grants that we get to announce tonight, but to have a new foundation at Austin East and to be able to commit $40,000 that principal can use is fantastic.
We have a motion by Ms. Satterfield, second by Mr. Watson. All in favor? Motion carries.
9A, approve contract with Anixter Incorporated for provision of networking materials for the term of October 1, 2021 to September 30, 2022, which may be extended for 4 additional years at an estimated annual cost of $2 million using technology, general purpose, technology upgrades, and capital plan funds.
So a motion by Ms. Owen and a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
9B, approve contract with Path Construction Northeast Incorporated for the Gibbs High School Stadium project in the amount of $3,206,000.
So a motion by Mr. McMillan, a second by Ms. Bound. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
10A, approve increase of $163,213 to design contract for new Adrian Burnett Elementary School project.
So motion by Ms. Bounds, second by Ms. Owen. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
10B, approve increase of $261,000 to design contract for new Northwest Sector Elementary School project.
So motion by Ms. Henderson, second by Ms. Horn. Any discussion?
I just have a question. Because we keep calling this the Northwest Elementary School, is this school going to have a naming? I mean, I see the confusion with Northwest Middle School, and they're nowhere near each other. And so it just kind of concerns me that we keep calling them the same name pretty much.
I won't go into the history of why why two schools so far away have a different name or same name, but there's a reason for that. But yes, we will go through a process to name the school at some point, and that would probably be subsequent to identifying a principal for that school. You remember back with the North Shore, that was the Southwest Elementary School project for a number of years until we brought on a principal, and we can go through a community process to, with the community of that school to determine what the name is.
Okay, thank you. I just got concerned that it was already being labeled that was going to stick, and I just felt like there was going to be a lot of confusion. So thank you.
Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Oakes, we all know that our costs for construction across the board are just going like crazy. I was trying to buy 4 metal poles today for $1,000, 12 feet. I mean, it's crazy. And I know that oftentimes architectural cost is directly tied to a percentage. Is 5.62% standard in our contracts for contractual costs, architectural costs?
Our architectural costs are set by state statute, and it's a percent of the project. I'd have to, for the details on that, I'd have to defer to.
That's okay.
Mr.
I mainly
Sheldon,
want to know
but
that it was standard, so it's set by the state.
There is a standard process to go through, and it's a calculation that is made, and there's not a lot of leeway in
Right.
it. So what's driving this is the fact that we've got increased contract costs, so the architects get a bigger share.
Thank you.
Ms. Babb? Did you have anything? Okay, so we have a motion by Ms. Henderson and a second by Ms. Horn. All in favor? Motion carries.
10C, approve fund balance designation in the amount of $2,090,000.
So a motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Mr. McMillan. Any discussion? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Oakes, just because it changed between last week's agenda, can you just speak to the detail that was provided for tonight?
Yeah, and I'll talk, to my piece of it. $2 million of this $2,090,000 is related to the Gibbs project and our need to put in an additional portable classroom at Hardin Valley Elementary School. We're funded for one. We need two. And so that's why we're asking for $400,000 out of this. And then 1.6 million is for the increased contract cost for path construction on the stadium. It's significantly higher than what we budgeted several years ago. And so this will get us to where we can cover those costs.
Thank you.
So we have a motion by Ms. Bounds, a second by Mr. McMillan. All in favor? Motion carries. Okay, so we'll turn to Vice Chair, Ms. Satterfield, for public forum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 3 people signed up for public forum today, 4 people signed up for public forum today. I would like to just review the policy quickly, and then we'll start public forum. Public forum speakers shall address remarks to the entire board and not individual members. The board respects and appreciates the good intentions that bring citizens to speak at public forum. The board asks that the speakers show their respect to the board, the staff, and other citizens by speaking in a manner that is civil and courteous. The chair or vice chair shall have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who disrupts, degrading, or insulting, or insulting, or who does not adhere to public forum rules. All right, we have 5 minutes on the timer. We will start off with Ms. Caitlin Jones. Please state your name and county of residence.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Jones, and I live in Knox County. I'm the mother of a kindergartner at A.L. Lots. My son Alec was born with Down syndrome and has had a lot of physical and mental challenges that he must face in his life. Since he was just a few months old, he has been in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, and even aquatic therapy. Because of Alec's disability, he did start with Knox County School System 2 years ago at Cedar Bluff Preschool. Last year, when COVID-19 first hit, I was just as concerned, if not as any more other parent. After a while, and listening to doctors and specialists that we see regularly, and the CDC continually saying that this virus did not affect children like it did adults, I was obviously less concerned. Eventually, Alec did catch COVID-19 and was asymptomatic with no problems defeating the virus. At the start of this pandemic, I was willing to work within the guidelines to help stop the spread of COVID-19. However, here we are over a year later, and we've obviously been unsuccessful in doing so. However, something that we have accomplished with the stress of mask mandates, regular school closings, and sending kids home with showing any sort of illness for fear it's COVID is causing my son to regress exponentially in his social behavior, speech, basic education, and more. Alec has had severe sensory disorder that causes him extreme stress when he is around loud noises, touches a texture he does not like, or has things on his body he does not want, such as shoes, hats, etc. So you can imagine the fight that it was to try and keep a mask on him. I could see the emotional toll it was taking on my son as Alec's school continually tried to force him to wear a mask. Alec is nonverbal, therefore he does not understand the need for a mask. I understand that it was this board's decision to allow kids with special needs the option to opt out of this. However, continually throughout the school year, it was continually pushed by teachers and other school administrators. This was not only detrimental to his education and mental health, but caused a level of distrust within teachers and those with Alec who was supposed to be guiding him. Alec was sent home 18 times last school year because the school claimed that he was sick and he would not wear a mask. At one point, I was being called to pick him up multiple times a week due to what the staff said was a fever. Finally, I went into the school to pick him up and asked them to take his temperature in the office. I waited over 15 minutes for the nurse to come in, take his temperature 2 different times on 2 different thermometers, only for his temperature to be 98. Yet even after I proved that he did not have a fever and was showing no other symptoms, and that this was only about the teachers and staff wanting him to wear a mask, even with his disability, he was still sent home. This was brought to the attention of the preschool director and the primary school principal with no change. Last year, my son's preschool was closed for 54 days due to COVID and the cleaning schools. This means that out of a total of 184 days he should have been in school, he was not offered any services or education for 72 days. That is almost 40% of the school year. My son was unable to do online learning as his mental disability does not allow that. He still receives physical, occupational, and speech therapy through the school system, yet last year, due to closures and not having enough therapists, Alec did not receive the amount of therapy that was discussed and what was supposed to be under his IEP. At the end of the year, they had to change the number of hours of each therapy and have me sign a new IEP just so it did not look like they had not followed through with the amount of therapy he was supposed to receive with the original one. I understand you are trying to do what you think is best for Knox County as a whole. However, according to the FAPE Act, the Free Appropriate Publication, my son deserves the same education that any other child does. I propose when schools do inevitably close this year, you keep 1 or 2 schools open for children who are unable to do online learning. Ask teachers to volunteer to work with these kids who will otherwise once be left behind. If schools continue to close, like my sons did last year, hire enough therapists to make sure they are still receiving the amount of therapy listed in their IEP, as his insurance would no longer cover therapy since he was supposed to be receiving it through the county. I know I would be willing to drive Alec to any school, no matter where in Knox County, to ensure he gets the education that he deserves. Finally, I urge you to consider these kids with disabilities in all decisions you make. The mandates and guidelines this boards approve affects kids like my son, and unfortunately, he always seems to be forgotten. If you conclude you must enforce a mask mandate, please make sure that children who cannot wear them are not forced to. Have an open line of communication for complaints with upper school board members when schools do try and make kids like my son wear a mask. And find a reasonable solution to allow my son the same education he deserves and with other children of disabilities. I urge you, do not forget my son this year when making decisions, and remember that all children, no matter the abilities, deserve the right to have an education. And I have copies of all of the emails from when his school was closed and any other thing that you guys might need to look for a way to make sure that he's still getting the education that any other student should.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Next, we'll have Greg Pavich. State your name and county residence. Thank you.
My name is Greg Pavanich, and I'm from Knox County, Powell especially. But I am a educator myself. I have taught at Powell High School. I'm currently at Oak Ridge High School. My wife is also a TA at Bricky McLeod Elementary. And I was just bringing up some issues that I have with school lockers. So currently my daughter is in 6th grade and she does not have an access to a locker because at Powell Middle School, they have decided to zip tie them and not give access to any student. My child is 60 pounds and she's carrying around a 14-pound backpack. If you do any research on the internet, you will find that is not acceptable by any pediatrician. I know last year it was due to COVID and the emergency fund that the governor passed through, but that has been released. Some schools are allowing lockers. Other schools are not allowing lockers. The Powell Middle School has a huge neighborhood behind it. Tons of kids walk to and from schools with backpacks 20 pounds. The other day, we were riding in a van with a school board member at the PTA event, and we noticed a kid put a backpack on, steered the bike, fell down. Backpack was too heavy, trying transportation. What I'm trying to state here is that you have to have some kind of uniform policy. If parents are sending their kids to doctors or chiropractors, which I know they did last year, then we have to have some kind of common ground of maybe during COVID, that's acceptable, but we cannot have some school principals the flexibility to shut down taxpayer lockers and others not. When we were given an option of something else, the administration at Powell Middle School said, you can get a rolling backpack and you can roll it around. How many students in Knox County do not have access to the money to buy one backpack, 2 backpacks? Well, guess what happened when my daughter at 6th grade brought a backpack in? She got made fun of. She got bullied. Why? Because we all know, I'm an educator, they're different, right? When you're a little bit different, you're a little bit different, and people make fun of that. And so that was a result. So it's unacceptable that a solution requires money out of people's pocket and that that somehow you get made fun of. Those two things are not acceptable in my book. It's not acceptable that Hall's middle school, Carnes Elementary School have access to their lockers. They are no less of a discipline problem than Powell Middle School, because that's what we're told over and over again, the reason why they don't have access. Because during COVID, they found masking up children, sending down a hallway one way was less discipline. And they got to class faster. And they support, let's not give them lockers again. You want to know why? Because there's less drama in the hallways. And they have quicker response time and more classroom time. Well, if I remember growing up, it was a privilege going to middle school where I had access to my locker for the first time. And I was allowed to socialize and be a social being. I'm a high school teacher. We can't just have kids not socializing in the hallways in middle school and then send them to high school where they just have leaps and bounds of like they can talk, they can be on their cell phones. It's the ease of teachers and discipline down the hallway, which is keeping these lockers locked. And we want, as a community, for you to pass some kind of legislation that says, hey, unless if there's an emergency, kids have opportunities to put backpacks and books in a locker and walk home or do whatever they need to do. But born out of COVID was these locked lockers that are now being used for teacher ease versus student health. And that is not an option. Us as teachers, we should be supporting our community, and our community wants our kids to have lockers. It's just not the consistent locker policy, and maybe we don't understand what's going on with, there was nothing ever mentioned about COVID, and maybe like lining kids up down the hallways and being quiet is easier, but not at the detriment of our kids' backs and policies and causing people to get backpacks and having parents send their kids to the chiropractor. I just feel like that's ripe for a lawsuit if that continues on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Brian Carnello. State your name and county resident.
My name is Brian R. Carniello. I am a resident of Knox County, District 5. I've lived in 37923 for 16 years. I'm here today as a parent of 2 children who are under 12 years old, who should be going to Blue Glass Elementary School, but who are not. And as the vice chair of KCS PASS, the Parent Advocates for School Safety, and I first would just like to say that there are many parents who are extremely concerned about the dashboard. They're concerned because there are wildly different numbers on the KCS dashboard, the numbers reported by KCHD, and the numbers reported by the Tennessee Department of Health. The disparities of those numbers have caused a lot of concern among parents. They're asking that there be individual school dashboards with 2 simple data points: student absences and teacher absences for each school. So if something could be made possible to provide that information, it would be very helpful as parents make their decisions regarding their children, their children's education, their children's safety. When I called yesterday to sign up to speak, I was told that the issue of mitigation measures to keep our schools safe during the pandemic was not on the agenda, and I had known that to be the case. I didn't expect that to be on the agenda this evening. I was surprised when I was told yesterday that the emergency meeting last week about mitigation measures was called in order to put the issue to rest. That surprised me that it was phrased that way, and I actually found out from another parent that I wasn't the only person who was told that. If that was the goal of the majority of the members of this board, I think that failed. Since your decision on August 11th and your decision again last week not to implement the mitigation measures that have been recommended by the CDC and the Tennessee Department of Health, the situation has continued to get worse than it was in August. You have not put this to rest. Several teachers have simply resigned as a result. One teacher at Cedar Bluff Middle School, who was taught at Knox County Schools for 16 years, reluctantly resigned yesterday because you failed to provide a safe work environment. She has a weakened immune system and can no longer take being afraid coming to work. Yesterday, you wrote a letter, at least it was dated yesterday, to Governor Lee. And I do understand that it's been characterized in different ways publicly and that there is some issue about the way it's been characterized. But one part of my own concern, having read that letter, was the way in which you present yourself as somehow champions of in-person learning. Your actions since the beginning of August resulted in mass absences, school buses being delayed 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, over 50 minutes. 2 high schools in KCS having to close their doors to in-person learning less than a month into the school year and switch to virtual learning, and more schools will likely follow. The switch has been and will continue to be extremely difficult for teachers because they were not prepared for virtual learning. The many problems that have quickly become so evident have also come to the attention of the Tennessee Commissioner of Education, Penny Schwinn, who wrote on September 3rd to encourage KCS to do what I had expected to hear would be done when I came to a meeting of this board on August 4th. Just before school started, she encouraged you to, quote, utilize the same mitigation strategies used last year, such as temperature checks, physical distancing, and frequent hand washing. She encouraged you to utilize seating charts in all settings, presumably so you could actually help the Knox County Health Department do contact tracing rather than to pretend it's their problem when in fact it's also yours. And she encouraged you to return to mandatory masking. I came to this board's meeting on August 4th, expecting to hear that you'd be implementing those mitigation measures. And I was very surprised when you did not. Before your meeting on August 1st, I planned to send my two sons in person to Bluegrass Elementary on August 9th. I bought all the school supplies for their classes. They were on the website and they were ready to go. But after that meeting on August 4th, the day after, I registered them for homeschooling. It was obvious that the promises that you had made back in April were not going to be kept. It was obvious that my children could not go to school safely, and they have been homeschooled this entire year. And until there is a vaccine available for them, they will continue to be homeschooled. Extremely, honestly, disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll have Vernon Henry. Please state your name and county of residence, and you'll have 5 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. V. Henry, Knoxville, Tennessee, 37922. I am not speaking on my behalf today. I am actually acting as a proxy for Ms. D. Stafford. The words I'm getting ready to read, you actually already have a copy in your inbox, I was told earlier today. So I'm going to read this, and these are her words. If I foul them up, I apologize. Thank you for listening to my statement tonight. I'm back again to address the meeting last week and what I and many of my friends witnessed and the treatment we received. I mentioned last week as I maneuvered through those protesting the mask that people in the group pulling down their mask to moving closely to hug and talk to one another. A friend of mine who was signed up to speak was not permitted to enter because she had her children with her. So she stayed outside. While there, her children and her witnessed the following. A 10-year-old masked female bullied a maskless elderly man on a bicycle. While she taunted him to his face, her fellow masked up friends cheered her on and laughed at the elderly gentleman yielding a bare face while riding his bike. Outside, she was cheered on by adults as she made fun of him. While I sat inside with the rest of the group, I was reportedly videoed and photos taken of me without my consent, and later posted in a group making fun of my hearing impairment. Since when is it funny to make fun of people with medical conditions and disabilities? When I got up to go to the bathroom, I kid you not, one of the people literally hissed and growled at me. I'm not making this up. Afterwards, on the Speak group, multiple conversations started on how to strip me of my professional licenses, get my clinic closed, and brainstorm on what they could do to destroy my existence. The following day at my clinic, I received offensive emails. My clinic then began to receive 1-star ratings from people who had never been to the clinic. The phone calls then started berating my staff. It was a coordinated attack to destroy my livelihood and professional standing with the community. What is the one commonality in this childish, ridiculous behavior? The Speak group. The people trying to leave bad reviews and emails are all members of Speak. The group Speak for some of the Board of Education members have either moderated or participated in while encouraging mayhem with teachers and parents. Is this best that we can do as Knox County citizens? Pit neighbor against neighbor, encourage hate against people who dare to disagree, and encourage destruction of frontline health workers? I submit that we are better than that. As a teenager, I stood up for the board in the 80s, in the midst of a sea of parents who were demanding a little boy with HIV not be permitted to attend classes. The mob crowd was so hate-filled that they had to escort me out of town by police because the school board was so concerned with the threats from the mob. My middle-aged daughter was named for a beloved cousin who died from AIDS. I was at his bedside as he died and was told by staff hospital not to touch him for fear I would contract his illness. Today's mob mentality about COVID is so similar to how many people with HIV/AIDS in the early days. In clinical practice, I have never once stopped touching my patients with AIDS. I will not stop providing physical exams and treatments for people with COVID now or ever. The behavior of the current mob mentality seems to be led by a handful of parents and school board members who appear to want to continue hateful and destructive behavior towards the rest of us who simply want to peacefully live life. The question is, how much do these causing all this strife wish to ramp up the rhetoric? Are you going to keep up until someone is physically harmed? We have already known how many suicides that have occurred in Knox County schools and how many murders of youth. Those causing hate, we join together with Ms. Everly and other community leaders who can do something tangible to help kids. But no, it is more important to keep the hate going on to make a real difference. Increasing hate and harassment from those seeking to harm our community need to be part of an official government record. And I thank you for allowing me to submit this to public record tonight. For those of you who say Jesus would wear a mask, maybe he would, maybe he would not. What I do know that this is at the time when lepers were banned from being touched and cast into the wilderness, Jesus held, touched, and held.
Thank you
and
so
healed
much, Mr.
lepers.
Henry. Thank you so
He
much.
did so with
That
love.
concludes public forum. Thank you so
Let there
much.
be Jesus. Let us be
Thank
more
you,
like
sir.
Jesus. Thank you.
Appreciate you. That concludes public forum.